that Flight 93 had turned off its transponder, had turned, and was now heading towards Washington, D.C. The decision was made to try to go intercept Flight 93.
The rules have changed. We could do something about it now.
Colonel Bob Marr is in command at the Northeast Air Defense Sector base in Rome, New York.
The words that I remember as clear as day was, "We will take lives in the air to preserve lives on the ground."
Marr orders his air controllers tell the pilots to intercept Flight 93.
United Airlines Flight 93 will not be allowed to reach Washington, D.C.
The closure time came and went, and nothing had happened. So you can imagine everything was very tense.
Flight 93 is about 175 miles north and west of Washington, flying over Somerset County, Pennsylvania. Up above, a fighter jet streaks by.
It was about, 10:03 that the fighters reported that Flight 93 had crashed.
Eventually, of course, we never fired on any aircraft.
When you heard the plane was down without a shot being fired at it, do you remember what you said?
We just witnessed an act of heroism.
Was Flight 93 downed by hijackers in an open field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania? Or is the truth being withheld from the public?
I want to tell you that we are getting word from New York right now that another building has collapsed. I understand that this is a 47-story building.
It's Building 7 of the World Trade Center, we understand, has collapsed in New York. And there you saw a video of it. Now, whether we don't even know whether this was something that was engineered for safety reasons or it just happened.
For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
In 1984, construction began on World Trade Center Building 7, a 47-story office building, 570 feet tall, and 300 feet away from the North Tower. It opened to the public in 1987 and housed offices for Department of Defense, Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Internal Revenue Service. Building 7 was considered the Central Intelligence Agency's largest station outside of Washington, D.C., and was also the Secret Service's biggest field office. Numerous cases would be closed due to its destruction. On June 8, 1999, Mayor Rudolph Giuliani's Office of Emergency Management Command Center on the 23rd floor is opened.
The command center on the 23rd floor is bulletproof and bomb-resistant, with its own air supply and generators. It's linked to city airports, the Coast Guard, and the Pentagon. Computers will soon have detailed blueprints of every major building in New York City, as well as evacuation routes. Hurricanes and heat waves would be handled here, as well as terrorist attacks. Though New York officials say their facility is not impenetrable, they're confident it could handle even the worst crisis imaginable. Deborah Fayerick for CNN, New York.
The 50,000 square foot center has reinforced, bulletproof, and bomb-resistant walls, its own air supply and water tank, beds and showers, and 3 backup generators. It has countless monitors which oversee police and fire department responses, and it is staffed around the clock. Hours before the first plane would strike the World Trade Center, Building 7's alarm system would be placed on test status at 6:47 a.m. for a scheduled period of 8 hours. This normally occurs during maintenance, and any fire alarms from the building are disregarded. After the second plane strikes the South Tower, the building's power is shut off, and its tenants are evacuated. The major fires in World Trade Center 7 were as follows. On the east face, between floors 11 and 12. On the north face, on floors 7 and 12. On the west face, between floors 29 and 30. Smoke obscures the entire south face of the building. By 3 p.m., Chief Daniel Nigro of the FDNY had set up a collapse zone around Building 7. After 4 p.m., news outlets began reporting that the building had collapsed.
We are getting information now that one of the other buildings, Building 7, in the World Trade Center complex, is on fire and has either collapsed or is collapsing.
We've got some news just coming in, actually, that the Salomon Brothers building in New York, right in the heart of Manhattan, has also collapsed. Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing, and indeed it has. Apparently that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were, and it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent Jane Stanley. Presumably there were very few people in the Salomon building when it collapsed. I mean, there were, I suppose, fears of possible further collapses around the area.
That's what you would hope, because this whole downtown area behind me has been completely sealed off and evacuated, apart from the emergency workers. That was done by the mayor, Rudy Giuliani.
Jane, I think many of us, when we heard the news, perhaps on the radio earlier today, were completely flabbergasted by it and just couldn't comprehend it. I mean, it almost sounded too far-fetched. I was wondering what it's felt like for you being in Manhattan. Well, unfortunately, I think we've lost the line with Jane Stanley in Manhattan. Perhaps we can rejoin her and follow that up later.
Where did CNN and BBC get their information, especially considering the building was still standing directly behind their reporters? The collapse of the building at 5:20 p.m. would cause speculation as to how it fell. The collapse of the main structure takes place in approximately 6.5 seconds, and the building falls symmetrically into its own footprint, barely damaging the surrounding structures. It will create a pyroclastic cloud that mushrooms down surrounding streets. Initially, it is assumed that the building's diesel tank may have been responsible for the collapse. The Federal Emergency Management Agency's report in 2002 will state that the specifics of the fires in WTC-7 and how they caused the building to collapse remain unknown at this time.
FEMA does analyze the collapse of Building 7, but then they say our best hypothesis has only a low probability of occurrence. This needs further investigation, and I certainly agree with them on that. Then NIST is handed the ball. It's kind of a hot potato. Okay, NIST, you explain the collapse of World Trade Center 7, this rapid, straight-down collapse of this 47-story skyscraper.
Sadly, by this time, virtually all structural steel from Ground Zero had been recycled, and no steel was recovered from Building 7 for investigation. As of this date, NIST is still working on their final report.
Well, NIST decoupled the study of the collapse of Building 7 from the analysis of the collapse of the towers. So now it's sitting over here. The report on the collapse of Building 7 from NIST is long overdue. We're still waiting for it, hoping they have an explanation.
We are looking at it. There's actually a very good write-up recently from Controlled Demolition Experts, which you probably ought to read. We haven't finished the investigation yet, so I'm not at liberty to talk about any intermediate findings.
The collapse is assumed to be caused by a combination of fire and structural damage. Did any other surrounding buildings suffer a complete collapse at near freefall speed? Building 3, a 22-story building directly below the Twin Towers, was split in half by the South Tower's collapse. Although the building was severely crushed by falling debris, the structure remained standing. Building 4, a 9-story building east of the South Tower, was almost completely destroyed. The remaining structure did not collapse. Building 5, a 9-story building east of the North Tower, suffered from severe fires and structural damage. Building 6,